You're listening to the Sunny Days Podcast. I'm your host, Alex the Good Witch, a professional psychic, healer, and coach specializing in subconscious reprogramming, inner child work, and intuition development to help you create your happiest, most fulfilling life. Thank you for tuning in on this sunny day. Hello, welcome to the Sunny Days Podcast. I'm your host, Alex the Good Witch. I specialize in subconscious reprogramming and working with ourselves in a lot of different ways, that being parts work, inner child work, intuition development, and a whole bunch of other things. And today we're going to be focusing on anxious attachment. And it's actually going to be a special format for this podcast because what I've done is I've taken a lesson from my program called Love and Happiness. And I just really had this vision after making this specific video lesson for the program to be able to bring some of it onto the podcast and share it with you all and just have it out in the open. So the format is going to look a little different. We'll be jumping in at a certain point in the lesson. So I just wanted to point out that this lesson has been built up to within the Love and Happiness program. So real quick, I'll just go over a couple things that I feel like you should probably just know for context is attachment styles are created from infancy and usually seen or able to be like detected what your attachment style is at around 7 months. So very young. This is something that is created in us at a very, very, very young age, like from the start. So that's just important to know. So when I talk about anxious attachment in the following segment, you'll understand why I am talking about like babies and infants. It's because it's important to understand where we're coming from and have more of an understanding of ourselves, to be able to work with ourselves, more empathy and grace towards ourselves, and more of understanding like what we need to actually do to heal and shift where we're coming from and what we've been set up to kind of have in our programming and to continue to experience specifically in our love life, because Love and Happiness is all about love, dating, relationships, regardless of where you're at. Is for you if you are looking to improve your love life and be in the love life that you truly deserve. And at the end of the day, you truly desire that your soul came here for. So anyway, that's why it is talked about in regards to love in the following segment. Okay, so I will play this segment that is from the Love and Happiness program, and then I'll hop back on at the end of the segment to be able to wrap things up in a way that's more congruent with the podcast. So see you in a bit. Okay, so a recap of anxious attachment because we had an overview of the different attachments. So we talked about how the source, meaning the original dynamic that created this kind of subconscious programming within us, came from a caretaker or caretakers who were sometimes attuned, sometimes not. It was very hit or miss, which then brings the anxious attached person to internalize negativity, a lot of self-blame, a lot of my fault, a lot of if I were good or if I did things a certain way, I would be able to get the outside to be secure and to be stable. Attune, again, just to recap, means to be able to perceive and understand the needs of the baby in this case, and to be able to meet them. So both understand them and get them right, so to speak, and be able to meet those needs. And then the style is how that shows up in your life. So there tends to be a general distrust because things were hit or miss, so it was hard to trust the situation, trust that someone was always gonna be there, always be able to meet your needs, right? And that distrust leads to a need for validation, always wanting to try to confirm that, yes, this person will still be here. Yes, my needs will be met. Yes, I will be okay. And looking for that validation on the outside through other people's behaviors and words and things like that, because you don't trust the security to just be there, and your needs to just be met and so on. So there's also this deep fear of abandonment because of that kind of come and go, whether or not people were physically coming and going, that come and go of love and physical needs and things like that. So there's this fear of abandonment. There's fear of if there is this source of like love and comfort and my needs being met, there's this deep fear of that going away. And then that leads to a desire to be able to depend. So it often leads to like codependent behaviors because there is like this drive to be able to depend on someone and be able to think that that dependence is unconditional and that there's a way that that can always ring true because of the type of insecurity that anxious attachment has. Okay, so anxious attachment in love. So I'm going to go over how this tends to show up for people with anxious attachments and how it affects their love life and why. Um, so with this, as I mentioned before, these videos are not necessarily to, box you into any specific attachment. It's to see what resonates with you, get more understanding where from there. And also, I encourage you all to watch the main videos of each attachment, regardless of whether or not you resonate with that style of attachment. So I want you to know that if you're here listening to this and you don't resonate with the anxious attachment, that this is important information for you, potentially with the partner that you have. Maybe you start to see how this kind of resonates with the behavior that you see in them and how they feel, um, or partners that you may potentially have. Um, and yeah, so I just want to throw that out there. So I'll talk more specifically about if this is you, what you can start doing, and if this is like the person that you're with or end up being with or seeing or whatever that is, that you're your external dynamic person or people, then what to do about that from your standpoint of not being anxious attachment. Okay, so um, there tends to be a hypersensitivity, um, meaning that it's very easy to take things personally. So they're very hypersensitive to criticism, to if there's any kind of complaint or discourse or argument. There's like a hypersensitivity to that. It makes them very uncomfortable, really feels like it's their fault. And this can also be in more subtle ways too. They're very hypersensitive to the people that they're dating or in a relationship with, like their tone, um, like facial expressions, their little like micro actions and behaviors. They're very hypersensitive to those things. And they very much easily read it as they are upset with me, they're mad at me, they have an issue, I did something wrong, there's guilt, it's my fault. It very much becomes internalized. And a lot of this hypersensitivity, I mean, to them, it feels 100% true. And like, I read the situation perfectly. They are mad at me. I knew it. But a lot of times, the hypersensitivity is actually just bias and it actually isn't even true. There's a lot of misreading of the situation, of the tone of voice, of, whatever it is. And then there's also this hypervigilance. So there's a hypersensitivity to what's going on. But I kind of alluded to it when I was talking about it, is that there's this hypervigilance too, where they're always looking out for any little thing to be off, any little thing to be wrong. Um, that's why there's a lot of like questioning, like, are you sure you're not mad at me? There's just a lot of hypervigilance, um, of like noticing every little thing, like, oh, they didn't text back. Within an hour, and they usually text back within an hour. There's a lot of that going on. And for this, this tends to stem from the mistrust, right? So there's that mistrust of the thing on the outside or the person on the outside being able to just be there and be secure and you're able to depend on them. There's this mistrust of that. So there's this always looking out for when is the other shoe going to drop? Like looking for clues of when they won't be there, when they'll leave me, they'll ignore me, when they'll be mad at me and inevitably not want to be with me. So that hypervigilance comes from the mistrust. And then there is an overall sense of worry and stress about love, love in general, your current situation. So there's a lot of worry and stress about like if you're single, if you're in a relationship but they haven't proposed yet and you would like them to propose. There's a lot of worry and stress about whatever the situation is. There's a lot of worry and stress about the relationship itself. Like, is this a forever thing? Um, can they stay with me forever? Are they going to leave me? Are they going to cheat on me? And then the person. So there's a general worry and stress about the person. What are they thinking? What are they doing? Why did they do this? Are they mad at me? How are they feeling? So a lot of worry and stress. Basically, there's like a lot of energy really devoted to love in general. Again, whether it's a situation, the person, wherever it's directed to, just love in general. There might be a lot of energy that's kind of always going on, even if in the background, um, around love. It's taking up a lot of your energy. It's kind of like if you, this would happen a lot where if you have an anxious attachment style, you may be, let's say, on a trip with your friends. And while you're on a trip with the friends, you are checking your phone. Is the person that you're seeing responding to your texts? Have they answered while you're gone? And there's a lot of preoccupation with what's going on in that aspect of your life, even when you are placed in other aspects of your life. And then this worry and stress comes from the mistrust, right? There's this mistrust that, someone will be able to stay or be loyal or commit to you. Will they want to be with you? Did you do something wrong, right? There's a lot of mistrust, and that's what causes a lot of the worry and the stress because you can't just be grounded and just let things be how they are and just, you know, have the assumption that everything is fine until proven or shown otherwise explicitly. You can't have that with the anxious attachment because there is a mistrust of the situation or of the dynamic. And then another common thing with anxious attachment is low self-esteem, and this comes from it feeling like it's their fault, like that internal blame that I talked about. So there's this low self-esteem where it'll a lot of time feel like why me? Why can no one love me? Why does everyone leave me? Um, why does everyone cheat on me? And it very much is you centric in like a negative way. Like you are the center of these bad outcomes. You don't deserve it. You'll never have it. You're not good enough for it. Other people get to have this and you don't. And that can come in that way, and it can also come about in insecurity and low self-esteem just in general. Like going, like in relationships, feeling like you're unable to um really back yourself up, like, be assertive and bring things up in the relationship because there is this general fear about the abandonment and the mistrust. And there's a lot of like, if I were to bring this up and they were to react negatively to it, or it would have a negative impact on the relationship, like that would be all my fault. Like I rocked the boat and tipped the boat over. So there's low self-esteem too, in like your own voice a lot of times, like your ability to bring things up, maybe just you as a person and your worth. So there's kind of a lot that can come up with the low self-esteem. And then there tends to be people pleasing, self-sacrificing, and excusing others, but being really hard on yourself. So the people pleasing is like you want to make sure that people um, regard you, have a high regard for you. So the people pleasing at the end of the day, even though it might seem like selflessness and generosity, people pleasing truly comes from not wanting to be seen in a bad light. And with an anxious attachment, that's like one of the worst things, is because if you're seen in a bad light, then you might be affecting the situation to where they leave or they withdraw or don't want to be with you. They misattune, basically, right? You're creating it to not have those moments of security. You're creating it to have those moments that were scary as a baby, which is to be misattuned, and to not be connected to and given your needs to, provided for. So you people please in an attempt to have people see you in a positive light and have your significant other, the people that you're dating, see you as good, so that in hopes that that means that they will give you what you need and be there for you and love you and not leave, because you're showing how good and valuable you are. So there's a lot of people pleasing that leads to a lot of self-sacrificing. And then with that, there tends to be this like ability to be able to excuse others and their behavior and be really hard on yourself at the same time. So you give yourself a very different treatment than you give other people. So this would be, let's say, someone that you're with, um, says something that hurt your feelings or whatnot. You might be a lot more able to reconcile where they're coming from and like understand that, well, they were really upset, and they didn't mean it. And, I know that they struggle with this thing. You're able to kind of have that understanding and empathy towards them. But if you were to do anything that would make your partner or person you're dating upset, you would be very hard on yourself. You wouldn't have that same kind of understanding of, well, I was really stressed and like, I've gone through really hard things that brought that up and I was triggered or whatever it is, right? All those like reasonings and justifications and excuses, or even just understanding. It doesn't have to be excuses, but the understanding, you're not giving that to yourself, but you could give it to other people. So it makes it easy to excuse the behaviors of others and not see even their accountability, or just have that understanding for them, but not have that understanding for yourself. And then on the flip side too, like you might have a lot of accountability for yourself. Like you see all the ways that you affect the relationship and like, oh yeah, I was being needy. So like I can see why they didn't want to be with me and I'll work on that. And there's a lot of like it being your fault and like accountability, but to like an extreme extent where you hold yourself to all of that and you hold yourself to what's going on, and you don't necessarily hold the other person. And at the same time, like I said, you can be understanding maybe of the other person, but not understanding of yourself. And again, that stems from the it's my fault kind of mentality. Okay, so there's also a dependence on validation, like I mentioned before. So this dependence on validation comes through people's like actions and words, and not just their actions and their words, but also what the anxious attachment person will interpret to mean. So kind of like the hypersensitivity will, where they'll take something of what the person that they're seeing is doing, and make it mean something. So for example, if they, you know, text me all the time while they're on a trip, that means that I have security here. Um, and if they don't text me while they're on a trip, that means that I don't have security here, right? And it's scary. And that's like interpreting a meaning, because neither of those things need to mean more than they really do. Like someone who texts you during a trip might text you during a trip. Maybe they were on their phone more, had more free time, right? If someone isn't texting you on a trip, it doesn't mean that they weren't thinking about you the whole time, or it doesn't mean that they don't love or care about you or want to continue to pursue something with you when they get back. It could just mean that they were really present with the trip, and being present with the trip meant that they weren't really interacting with people who weren't on the trip, right? So that was just an example, but there's a lot of interpreting meaning in order to see, is this something that validates my safety or is it something that invalidates my safety? Because I never know. I never know if I'm going to be attuned to or if I'm not going to be attuned to. And then, of course, actions and words. So, like certain actions will be validating, certain words will be validating. But there's a lot of dependence on it. So it's valid that, yeah, when someone tells you things and has certain actions, that can be reassuring and that can paint a picture of, you know, how they feel towards you and their level of commitment and things like that. But the problem is there's this dependent on validation, and that causes a lot of worry and stress about what they're doing and what they're saying, what they're not doing and saying, and interpreting all the meanings. There's too much dependence on that outside because it relates back deep down to your own safety. And is this going to be a safe situation or not safe situation? I never know. So I need to be able to predict it. I need to constantly have this external validation of the situation in order to feel safe. And that's too much to ask. Not that your needs are too much, but that's too much to ask for yourself, right? Like that's a really difficult place to be, because at the end of the day, you're not going to necessarily get that unconditional validation, right? You can't always, in every moment, every second of the day, be validated about the situation. A lot of those seconds of the day have to come from a general sense of feeling grounded and secure just automatically. And then as things come up, they can kind of give you an observation of, is there something that I should be concerned about, that we should talk about, or is there something that makes me feel really good and I really appreciate this form of validation that I was just given? But there's like, like a baseline there of groundedness, not needing to depend on that validation, which is always going to be come and go off and on. Like even if you're to be married with someone, that person may stay home late one night after work, right? And like, what does that mean? What does that bring up, right? Um, that person may end up being distant for a month and going through a depression, or they may be experience something where they are, just feeling detached and disconnected from you, and it's just a phase, right? So there's nothing that can like give you that ultimate validation that you'd always be seeking in the anxious attachment. And that's why it is unfair to yourself. Um, and yeah, unfair to yourself. I don't want to talk about how it's like unfair to other people. At the end of the day, it's unfair to yourself. Okay, another thing that will come up with anxious attachment is jealousy, neediness, clinginess, and being emotionally hungry. So you don't need to necessarily have all of these things, but they flow together. So we all know what jealousy is, and that jealousy stems from the mistrust, right? You can't trust that that person is going to be able to be loyal to you. Or it might not even be a sense of loyalty. Like there's been plenty of times where when I was in like the anxious attachment, I didn't necessarily think anyone was like cheating on me. But there was this general mistrust of their feelings towards me and maybe towards other people. Like, if we were at a party and they were like mingling with someone who was attractive, the jealousy may not be that I thought they were going to be disloyal, but the jealousy is that they, would be more interested in being with them than being with me. And that's why I'm jealous of them. So jealousy could mean like, jealousy of like being unloyal or cheating and things like that. But there could be other types of jealousy as well, where you just see that other people are more worthy or more fun or more pretty, and things like that that get brought up from being in a relationship or seeing somebody. And then neediness and clinginess would be really um, needing a lot of something from someone. So this usually is like time and affection. And I don't like those words in like a judgmental sense, but I'm just trying to paint the energy here. So this neediness is like I only feel okay if like you spend most of your time with me, right? Or I only feel okay if you answer all my texts by the time I go to sleep, because if you don't answer my text by the time I go to sleep, then I can't sleep, you know? Um, So there's this neediness, this clinginess, and emotionally hungry means that there's kind of this empty, like, unsatiatedness of, needing to have your emotions, attuned to, basically, and, like, your needs being met. Um, so you'll start to act from that place without realizing it and put that on that person without realizing it. Like, your external actions may seem fine to you on paper, but they can feel that, and deep down, that's what you're doing, that's what you're reaching for is, like, you're always unsatiated. I remember I had this one relationship in particular, I was very codependent, and it was basically like, there was nothing like, looking, back from a clearer headspace and everything, there was, like, nothing this person could do to truly prove to me that they were going to love me and be there for me and with me and do all of the things, even though they were, and even though they said that they would, and they'd spend most of their time to me, and it was just like this never-ending need. Like, that's why I said it's like insatiable. Oops. Hello. Hi. My computer had overheated. So in case you notice any glitch or anything like that, I'm back at a different time. Um, and we can move forward. Okay, so wrapping up this slide, um, I do just want to say that there are certain overlaps in just how you feel in the attachment and some fears that you have and things like that with other types of attachment because at the end of the day like we're people who have similar or the same deep basic needs and the deep fears, right? So there's definitely some overlap, like an anxious attachment person might be afraid of someone seeing them as bad, and so could the avoidant attachment person, right? Because that's like a deep human fear that we might share, even though we might have kind of a different programming going on and how that plays out in our lives. So that's another reason why I don't really look at attachment in this way to just like diagnose you and to just go from there and have everything be very like black and white, but it is used as a tool to help see yourself more clearly and what has been affecting you in your love life and how we can then get to the source of it and help reprogram what's going on. So I did just want to mention that there, of course, naturally there's going to be like overlap, and it's not like you have to feel all these things in only this way. And if you're anxious attachment and if you're avoidant, you wouldn't be feeling any of these things. It's not like that. Okay. So, source of anxious attachment, right? So, we mentioned briefly the source of like how this comes about. So, we're going to talk more in depth about it because it's important for us to be able to work through the anxious attachment is to really understand where it's coming from, similar to like parts work and subconscious programming, so that we're not just like annoyed or frustrated with ourselves or embarrassed for like how we're playing out the anxious attachment and trying to force ourselves to act differently. It's more about really treating where this is coming from in the first place. So, again, to reiterate, the caretaker would sometimes be attuned, sometimes not. Um, and then I had put here, it must have went away, but I wanted to mention that sometimes anxious attachment is also referred to as preoccupied. And the reason that it's referred to as preoccupied sometimes is because um, where it comes from. So it's not necessarily the anxious person we're talking about, or the anxious attachment person, it's the source. So the caretaker was preoccupied, and that could be for a number of different reasons. That can be they're preoccupied with their own emotions and their own stress, or they can be literally preoccupied. So maybe they're preoccupied because there's all these other children. Maybe the person with the anxious attachment might be like the middle or later child of a lot more children. So the parent was preoccupied quite physically, literally, with like other tasks and other kids, or maybe they were like working a lot or working like many jobs, right? So preoccupied can be more in like a tangible sense, like with your like time and your like physical focus, and also just like emotionally or mentally preoccupied. So I just wanted to point that out to kind of paint the picture of this sometimes attuned, sometimes not. And can be for many reasons. Like I pointed out, could be a lot of reasons. A common one as well would be that they themselves have an anxious attachment style. So, right, so there's that preoccupied piece where maybe they don't necessarily have an anxious attachment style, or you wouldn't know what that is, and that's fine. We're not here to have to, like I said, know all the details of your upbringing and your caretakers, but and like read their minds. But um, maybe it came about because at that time they were preoccupied with whatever it is, but it could also be that it's just playing out like a cycle because they themselves have an anxious attachment style. They grew up where they were sometimes attuned to, sometimes not, for whatever reason. Maybe their caretaker was preoccupied with their emotions or other children, or right, whatever it is, and then it just gets passed on. Oops. It just gets passed on um, unless worked through otherwise. So most of these things that we talk about in this whole program will get passed on unless worked through otherwise. So if you don't end up having or raising any kids, then um, it would cycle through your life and affect your life. And if you were to have and raise kids, then you would most likely kind of pass on similar kinds of programming onto those children. So that's another reason where it could just be that the caretaker is just automatically, without realizing it, playing out that anxious attachment, and they don't really have the ability to be in a secure attachment at that point. Like they don't know anything else otherwise. And again, it's usually just like without realizing it that that's just kind of what they're giving off. And then, oh, there's the preoccupied that popped up. But so they aren't able to emotionally attune to themselves, let alone others. So that's a common source, right? Is that they're unable to emotionally attune to themselves. So this could be, like I said, because it's kind of the same cycle going on of they were raised with an anxious attachment and now they're kind of just playing that out where they were never able to attune to themselves because of that. And when they can't attune to themselves, they can't attune others, and they're very, again, preoccupied with their emotional state, and they're really zoomed in on whatever they're feeling like in that moment. That's a common source. And their emotional state would then dictate the level of attunement. So that's really important to note, is that their emotional state dictates the level of attunement, meaning that if they are in a place where they feel calm and they feel good, then they can attune. But if they're in a place where they feel really overwhelmed and really stressed or really scared or whatever it is, then they won't be able to attune. And it's important to know that in a secure attachment, overall, most of the time, someone within a secure attachment, whether they are in a calm state or they are dealing with stress, they would still be able to attune. Right? That's important to know because I think a lot of us probably would assume like, well, of course, if someone's stressed with something, then they wouldn't be able to attune. Ideally, and being in a secure attachment and fostering one would mean that even in times where someone is dealing with stress or emotional distress, they would actually still be able to attune. So in an anxious attachment, that's part of that kind of on and off um, like phenomenon of what's going on, like this hot and cold, is because it is really fluctuating based on the caretaker's emotional state. So I put unable to remain sturdy. So ideally, there would be this sturdiness, which basically is just like no matter what's going on, you're pretty much here. You can be affected by some things, and that's obviously normal and valid, but it's not really fluctuating. Your emotional state isn't moving up and down very drastically. Your ability to attune isn't kind of going on and off drastically. It's overall just pretty sturdy. So the caretakers themselves, like I mentioned, emotional hunger and how it affects someone with an anxious attachment. The caretakers themselves may have an emotional hunger, and this emotional hunger, like I mentioned, it's very insatiable, but you don't see it that way when you're in it. You just think that if I was shown more validation, more proof, more things that make me feel safe from this person and within this dynamic, then I would feel okay. without realizing that that need is kind of like never ending. Um, that emotional hunger they expect baby to fill. And again, this may not be like this conscious thought, but that is really where they're coming from and what they're exuding is that they expect baby to fill the emotional hunger. So you'll hear a lot how um, that unconditional love from the baby and everything, and how some people will have kids to kind of fill that hole to finally feel like they are able to receive that from something or someone. Um, that's that emotional hunger and expecting baby to fill that. And again, the expectation isn't necessarily conscious, but what's going on in that person's system is that they are expecting it to fill that void. And because of that, they only want certain states and behaviors of the child. So this kind of has to do with that emotional state fluctuation. So it's like the caretaker only feels good and feels validated when the child is happy and content. It makes the caretaker feel like they're a good person, they're a good caretaker, and it makes them feel safe, and it makes them feel like they finally got that sense of like what they need, because going back, they probably didn't get what they need, or what they needed was off and on too. So when the baby is like content and happy and things like that, they feel good about themselves, like it means something about themselves, and it's filling that emotional hunger. But the problem is that's very conditional. And when the child or baby has their own needs and emotions, so this would be like they're crying, they're fussy, they need things from you, and you're having to like give to them, even if you're going through your own stress and own emotions, like they're wanting from you, they're wanting things from you. Uh, the caretaker isn't going to feel very good. They won't like that, because it directly means something about them and their emotional state. Like it means they're not doing a good job. So it can make them very uncomfortable. Like let's say they're in public and the baby is crying, instead of just remaining sturdy and able to just calmly try to understand where the baby is coming from and give them their needs, and like remain like an emotional sturdiness for the baby and remain attuned to them. Instead, they're going to be very flustered because there's people around and the baby's crying, and like they're going to think that I'm a bad parent, and then it's just going to be misattunement from there, because now they're in like this state of stress, and when they're in a state of stress, they're unable to attune to themselves. Remember, they're unable to have like their own emotional regulation, so they're unable to attune to that baby, and then they're just like trying to get the baby to stop, but they're misreading all the cues, they're misunderstanding, they're doing it from a place that's not attuned, right? They're doing it from this place of like stress, and that's what the baby experiences. So the programming that gets into that baby would be when I'm, happy and calm, then I get to have my needs met. I get to be connected and attuned and to be loved. And when I'm not, then I don't get any of that. I get more stress, more problems. I don't get what I need. And that's my fault. Right, do you see how that gets internalized? Because it's like, I'm the cause of this person on the outside not being able to attune to me, and I'm also potentially the cause of them being able to attune to me, like, there's things that I could do to make them attune to me. But the problem is, the baby or any person has a full spectrum of needs and a full spectrum of emotions, so there's no way that anyone could just perfectly be in that happy, content state all of the time. But with the anxious attachment and what's being formed is that like I need to be that way in order to have my needs met and to be attuned to. And then that continues on in life. So there's oh, I should have put it in the ways that anxious attachment will show up in people. Perfectionism would be a really good one, because it's like I need to be perfect or just happy and good, right, in order to have people be there for me and to love me and to not leave me and to be able to connect and attune to me and have my emotional needs met, right? So that's what starts to form in the baby because of this. So I know that's like a whole thing, but it's very interesting. And hopefully you can see kind of this bridge of what's going on with caretaker and what that starts to mean to the baby, and then how, you would take that and grow up with that system that's now playing out, those beliefs and everything that are now playing out. You don't get to have your full spectrum of needs and emotions. You may also think, as someone with an anxious attachment, that your needs are too big. My needs are too big, I am too much, right? And you might consistently end up in situations and relationships that make you feel that way. Like, oh, like you're just so needy, right? You're asking for so much. Or even if people aren't explicitly telling you these things, it might feel that way in your relationships, right? Like, I don't want to bring this up, right? It's too much for me to ask. I don't want to inconvenience them. I don't want to rock the boat. So you can see how that starts to affect you, with your needs being too much, your range of emotions being too much, and feeling like you're going to push people away. And that stems from, now you can kind of understand, that stems from the caretaker. When you were having those needs and emotions, they couldn't handle it, and they weren't able to attune during those moments. They were probably only able to attune when you were more calm and more happy. And none of that is your fault. You, and it's still not your fault. You as a baby, you as a person, you have needs and you have emotions, and they're justified, and they're the right size. Um, that was a mantra that I like to use. I'll probably put that with the anxious attachment mantra, is that my needs are right sized. Um, yeah, your needs are right size, your emotions are right size. It's just that you didn't experience that, um, for whatever reason. Like, this isn't to blame anybody, but you didn't experience that, and then now it's in your system, and now that is how you continue to keep feeling in circumstances, especially in love, and what keeps coming up. And you might have noticed how I talked about, like, the feeling of pushing people away with your needs and with your emotions and with, quote unquote neediness and things like that. That's a common feeling of the anxious attachment. And that's why a lot of times, um, especially in like popular, like pop therapy and like social media and stuff, a lot will be focused on, like anxious attachment person with an avoidant attachment person, and how it can be this kind of like pushing away, like push pull kind of relationship. I won't go into that because, like I said, I'm not here to like stereotype all these attachments and everything, but that is why that would come up and why that does happen for some people. It's that feeling of that I'm pushing away, I'm being too needy, and now they're running away. When you take away that specific situation, that specific relationship, you can see how, back as like a baby, that's what it felt like. That's what was going on. Me needing would push the person away, because the person would be so stressed out by it. And they're stressed out by it not because of me. I took that to be my fault, but it's not because of me. It's because they are, or were unable to meet those needs, and that stressed them out. It made them feel bad. It made them feel, um, incapable, made them feel uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do with those needs and those emotions, right? But from what the baby intakes, all they see is that I had needs and that was bad. I had other emotions that weren't like content and happy. And I tried to communicate those things and vocalize those things, and that was bad. Okay. And then going back to the source, so we're kind of looking more at caretaker now, where this stems from, is, the child is often seen as an extension of the caretaker, um, meaning that they're not able to see the child as like separate from them, like an individual with their own needs and own emotions, which makes sense because when you think about how, when that baby is having like a hard time, they really see that as a reflection of them. Like in my example of like babies crying in public, and it's like, oh no, like I'm a bad parent, and they're very much like internalize everything, and they make it about them, and they can't separate that it's like it's okay for baby to have needs and emotions. It doesn't need to mean anything about me, and I can address them as like a separate adult from them. So the child's very much an extension of them, which also goes for their goodness, right? So this would be that, when baby's happy and content, that's a good thing about me. It's like a direct extension of me. And then if this kind of attachment, um, or this kind of programming in the caretaker was like to continue on, let's say, like through childhood, this would often show up too when like the child's achievements are a direct reflection of you, an extension of you, right? So, being very hyper focused on all that they like achieve and accomplish and how good they are, because that gives you, as the caretaker, a sense of value and a sense of worth, right? That's where you're getting it from. Um, and then same thing, if the child was to be bad and get in trouble and not do well, that would be an extension of them. And maybe they would be less like loving or affectionate or more like shamed or upset even or resentful of those kind of negative behaviors because it is an extension of them. Whereas when the child like does well, there's like a lot of um, overly like praising and pride and things like that because it gives them the value. So again, that kind of attachment can continue on and be reinforced through childhood. It's made in infancy, so that's what we've been focusing on. But you can see how, if this same kind of dynamic were to continue, how it would play out and continue to be reinforced as well as a child who is now, um, having their own kind of interests and achievements and failures and things like that. So, baby or child is an extension of them, and this becomes very invasive to the child because they don't kind of have their own sense of like, I am individual, I have boundaries, we are two separate beings. So, it's very invasive to the child, which can cause a lot of like invasive wounding, of feeling very like violated a lot, feeling ending up having tendencies to be like a doormat, if you will, like have people walk all over you, not be able to have boundaries, not be able to say no, because there's no like separateness here. That was never really created. It was created as like I'm an extension and this person gets to do and feel however they do towards me. I don't have my own like barrier. And so yeah, they don't exist in their own on their own and have their own needs. So this is the baby, the child. They don't get to like just exist on their own and have their own needs. A lot of times it's just about being able to meet the needs of the caretaker, especially like emotionally, right? And then not being able to exist on their own. Oops, not being able to exist on their own, it's as if they only exist within their like achievements or their goodness, right? Whatever was seen as like making the caretaker feel valuable and safe, like that's where the child ends up feeling like they actually exist and are seen. But when they have their own needs or have, deep feelings and things like that, they don't really feel like they exist or are seen or are heard. And again, they're basically used to validate the parent as good. Um, and this again is not it's usually not this whole conscious intentional thing by the caretaker, right? They probably don't even realize that they're doing it. But it's important to understand what the heck is going on if you're someone with an anxious attachment, or if you're listening in and you want to learn about anxious attachment for someone that you are with or could potentially be with. It's important to understand what's like really going on. Okay. So overall, right, with the source, the caretaker was probably preoccupied with their own emotional state and or like physical time and like what they needed to focus on and be doing. There's an overall preoccupation um and need to validate. So using the validation through the child. And remember, if for example, this is something that is passed down. And again, you don't have to know this is a yes or no answer. This is just painting the picture so you can understand where things are coming from for yourself better. But if this were to be something where it was like passed down, where maybe the caretaker had an anxious attachment, they have low self-esteem typically, right? Like how I mentioned, and how this shows up for people. There's this low self-esteem and this need for external validation. So that's going to play out into what we just talked about of how that gets kind of projected accidentally onto a baby. And why growing up, it might be very common for the caretaker to feel value from the achievements and the goodness of the child is because they themselves have low self-esteem. So that is something that makes them um, feel like they can boost their self-esteem because they don't just have that within. If they already just had that within in a very sturdy way, then it wouldn't matter if their child wasn't doing well in things or was acting out sometimes. Like none of that would have like an effect on who they are, right? And even more so, like how I said, some of the anxious attachment doesn't really kind of exist on their own and have that like um existence of I'm able to have my own needs and my own emotions and my own sturdiness on my own, not entangled or enmeshed or attached with anyone else. The caretaker might not necessarily have that either, right? So they don't exist on their own and they need that baby or that child to like create that sense of existence as well. And that's how they easily become an extension of them. So yeah, you can see how this all you can also see how this cycles, right? This is, I think attachment is a really good example, especially when you get into the subconscious programming of it, like how we started with that foundation. So you guys already have that knowledge as well. When you put these things together, you can like really see how cycles happen, right? You can see how a lot of what I'm saying for what happens to baby and how they feel is directly because caretaker actually deep down um, feels that way without really, without even really knowing it, and then like actually creates that in baby without even realizing it. Okay, so now circling back into the podcast, I hope that segment of anxious attachment from my love and happiness video was helpful. In that lesson, I continue to go on about how to understand anxious attachment, both for yourself, if that's something that resonates with you, and also from the perspective of someone else. So if you're someone who is maybe in a relationship with someone with an anxious attachment, or could potentially be in a relationship with someone with an anxious attachment as you meet people and date, or looking back, reconciling with a relationship you've had in the past. I explain how to have an understanding both for yourself if it resonates with you, or for someone else if that applies to someone that you are seeing or potentially seeing. And then I go in for that same kind of perspective as far as like what to do for you, what to do for someone else as far as support goes, and how to be able to take action to support yourself and or to support someone else with an anxious attachment so that you can find a place to allow for their growth and make them feel safe, but without necessarily like excusing behavior or adapting your whole life and your actions around their triggers and attachments, being able to find a way where you can support but also be accountable. Again, that goes both for yourself or for someone that you are interacting with. So I go more into that in that specific video lesson. For love and happiness in general, if you're curious about it, it is this huge program all about love, dating, relationships. Like I mentioned, it applies to you wherever you're at personally in your love life. And the cool thing is when you're in the program, you get access to everything, no matter where you're at. So as things might fluctuate in your life, you can always go back and look at things through a different lens. So, for example, if you're single now and you go through love and happiness and it helps you meet someone and it's amazing and you're in a relationship together, you can go back through whatever you would like and be able to apply it now to how do I use this in my relationship, right? How do I work together with someone now that I'm in a different kind of situation? And you get to do that because you have access to all materials, both current and anything new that pops up later on for life. So you'll have all of it to evolve with you. And as far as what I mean when I talk about materials that span from all different kinds of work that I have learned is super imperative to be able to meet and like connect with and create and maintain and facilitate the love life that is truly meant for you, that your soul came here for, that you deserve to experience, again, regardless of how you're coming into this program. But yeah, it encompasses so much that I would take up so much time going over all of the topics, but I would love for you to look more into it because it is an incredible program that holds your hand through the whole thing and helps you completely transform your life again in the way that is meant for you. It's very personal to you. It is not a one size fits all program by any means. And yeah, I would just love for you to check it out more. Rather than me, like I said, I can just go on and on about it forever. So I will drop the link for the program so that you can learn more about it and see if that is something that you are needing with where you're at. And if that's what you want for yourself, then I'd love to have you join. And I even have a special Sunny Days discount for you. So I'll drop that in the show notes as well. And yeah, I hope that bringing you this segment was helpful for you. I know that it was a little discombobulated because I, created it for the program and then just kind of took a part of it and put it here. But like I said, I just really felt called to share it. So I hope that I gave you some helpful insight either for you or for someone that you are in a relationship with or potentially will be. I hope you all have a very sunny day and I will see you around.